To Amendments 58 and 59 and moving Amendment 57, I feel I must begin by offering credit to the Earl of Lytton. I was looking at this bill thinking, how do we address some particularly pressing issues of safety and environmental concern around products, addressing particular air types of products, and the Noble Earl had put down an amendment on building products, and my drafting owes a great deal to the Noble Earl's amendments. So I feel like I should acknowledge that. And I will also note especially these in many ways mirror each other, but Noble Lords will notice there's a difference. The clothing safety suggests a 3-year period before action is taken. The single-use plastic suggests 2 years, and the period products suggest 1 year. And that, I think, is a reflection of the capability, the scientific understanding, the importance of taking action and the ability to take action as quickly as possible, and those are, I think, viable timeframes carefully selected in each one of those. Now, these 3 amendments fit very well together because they're all addressing the way in which we are exceeding the planetary boundary for what's known as novel entities, as identified by the Stockholm Resilience Centre. These are substances made by humans previously unknown in the natural world, that generally speaking the natural world has no capacity to deal with, to process, to get rid of. And when I'm talking about the natural world, I'm also talking about the bodies of human animals, and that's all of us. And these products, these chemicals, these plastics, these substances are accumulating in our environment day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, and they're not going away. And it's particularly people in the most disadvantaged communities, in the most disadvantaged situations, who are most exposed to these products and their increasingly understood health effects. So to begin with Amendment 57, about clothing safety. And I suspect there was probably some puzzlement in some quarters when people saw this unsafe clothing. Well, I have to pay credit to a new independent feature documentary called Let Them Be Naked, by the fashion designer Jeff Garner, and I went to a London Fashion Week showing of this documentary, which is focused on the use of toxic chemicals in fabrics and the harmful impacts on human and environmental health. Clothing that's worn next to our skin for long periods exposes us to chemicals that can cause short-term and long-term health effects, including cancer and fertility issues. Repeated testing of clothing such as socks, school uniforms and work uniforms has found harmful quantities of toxic chemicals well above legal limits and standards. And of course it's worth noting that whether it's school pupils or whether it's workers with a uniform, people have no choice in these matters. And this of course doesn't just affect the people wearing these clothing, it also affects the people who make them, where the material's dumped, etc. So just to bring in briefly some detailed information here. Laboratory research commissioned by the Centre for Canadian Broadcasting showed that out of 38 samples of clothing and accessories, 1 in 5 contained high levels of harmful chemicals such as lead, PFAS, known as forever chemicals, and phthalates. A North American lab study of stain-resistant school uniforms identified high levels of PFAS. And of course, these are uniforms being worn by often very small children. So the amount of PFAS to body weight ratio is very high. Another chemical of concern is bisphenol A. Research for the Centre for Environmental Health found that over 100 popular brands of socks contained up to 31 times the California's law safety limit for BPA. There's a very famous case of Alaska Airlines who introduced a new uniform. Staff who were forced to wear it reported symptoms of chemical sensitivity, sore throats, cough, shortness of breath, itchy skin, rashes and hives, itchy eyes, loss of voice and blurred vision. Now just to pick up one chemical, and this is very interesting British research from just this year, published in the journal Environmental International. And this was a real breakthrough piece of research. Previously, when it came to PFAS, these forever chemicals, it had been said, don't worry, they don't cross the skin barrier. So you can be wearing it, but it won't harm you. But this is research that's demonstrated that that is simply not true. It's already known, of course, that PFAS can enter the body through being breathed in or being ingested by food or water, and it's known by those routes that it causes a lower immune response to vaccination, impaired liver function, and decreased birth weight in babies. Now, this study from the University of Birmingham showed that of 17 PFASs tested, 15 showed substantial absorption through the skin. Remember, it had been said, no, this doesn't happen, it's fine. 15 of the 17 tested was being absorbed through the skin. At least 5% of the exposure dose was being absorbed. If we take one of the most regulated ones, PFOA, regulated because it's considered dangerous, 13.5% was absorbed through the skin. This, my lords, is on people's clothing being injected effectively into their bodies. Now, there's also the really important issue of plastics. And I think it's still starting to be understood, but still little understood, that as the Marine Conservation Organisation Plastic Soup Foundation pointed out recently, 69% of fashion is now synthetic materials. Microplastics. Noble lords have heard me before talking about how microplastics are being found in human testes, human placentas, human breast milk, human brains. And it's not just the microplastics themselves. It was pointed out at the Future Fabrics Expo in London earlier this year that nylon in particular is very detrimental to our lungs, especially in terms of repair of growth. It's not the fibre itself that's the primary culprit, but the chemicals associated with it. Now, my lords, I was looking around this committee and thinking, actually, I can't see a lot of artificial fibres, but we are a very privileged group of people. If you went and looked into a different socio-economic group, that would not be the case. So that's my clothing introduction. I turn now to Amendment 58, which of course is closely related because it's talking about single-use plastics. We're mostly hoping that clothing is not a single-use item, but of course in our environment today there is an enormous amount of single-use plastic that sometimes is used for seconds and then is going to exist in our environment for hundreds of years. And I here have to pay credit to City to Sea campaign group, I'm sure many noble lords are aware of, who have a briefing. If you haven't seen it, I'd be delighted to share. 220 million tonnes of plastic waste created in 2024. Globally, the average is 28 kilos per person. That's a 10% rise since 2021. So although we've been talking about plastics, we've been talking about having a UN plastics treaty, the amount of plastics being produced and put out into the world is still going up. So many of the products we're talking about, as we were referring to in the previous group, have unnecessary plastics wrapped around them, which are single-use plastics. And if we're going to be serious about making a safe world for people to live in, we need product regulation that drastically slashes this amount of single-use plastics. In the UK alone, households throw away an estimated 90 billion pieces of plastic packaging. That's nearly 70% of our plastic waste. If we're regulating products, we need to think about the packaging as well. And thinking again about the health impacts, if we look at a letter by the Plastics Health Council and signed by a high range of doctors, including the Alder Children's Hospital, the Royal College of Paediatric and Child Health, Queen's University Belfast, Doctors Against Harm and NHS Trust, it's called for action. This was in the UN context, but of course it also applies to this bill. This letter recognised that endocrine disrupting chemicals in plastics can impair sperm quality and fertility, cause cancers, endometriosis, early puberty, neurological and learning disabilities, abnormalities in sex organs, altered growth in nervous systems and immune function, and diverse respiratory, cardiovascular and metabolic diseases. I note that there's been a global decline in sperm counts of more than 60%, and leading scientists have suggested that most couples may have to use assisted reproduction by 2045. Now, I'm aware that noble lords may feel like I'm battering them over the heads with a whole lot of statistics, but we are talking about people's lives, people's health, people's future. And I've talked about something that applies to all of us, clothing and single-use plastics. But I'm going to turn now, and a reminder that this is the one in which I've suggested we should see within a year action from the government, which is period products. And I note here that I'm drawing very extensively on the work of the Women's Environmental Network, which has a proposed Menstrual Health, Dignity and Sustainability Act, which contains elements of this as well as much more beside. And I'm going to start with the biology. The vagina contains a very large number of blood vessels, which means that the skin is very absorbent. What is in period products really matters. Yet, as I learnt from Helen Lynn at Wen, there are more regulations currently about what can be in a candle than what can be in a tampon. Earlier this year, lead, arsenic and cadmium were all found in a variety of tampons tested in the UK and internationally. Single-use menstrual products have been shown to contain phthalates, bisphenols and parabens, which I've already talked about in other contexts. Despite their apparently cottony appearance, both tampons and pads can be up to 90% plastic, meaning they are continually shedding microplastics during use and afterwards. Many of these products contain fragrances, which are of particular concern. These synthetic fragrances are compiled from a cocktail of up to 3,000 different chemicals, none of which are, of course, recorded in the packaging, or indeed, picking up the noble Lord Holmes's point about transparency, available to consumers even if they go hunting to find what they are. They contain chemicals which are carcinogens, allergens, irritants and endocrine disrupting chemicals, which I've talked about before. Despite changes in bleaching practices to purify wood pulp, chlorine and dioxin, you really don't want to be putting dioxin in your body. Dioxin can still be found in menstrual pads and tampons. Now I'm going to come finally to a really crucial issue, fast developing, a real illustration of how lack of regulation lets us go horribly wrong. We've rightly seen, because of environmental concerns, we've seen a shift towards reusable menstrual products. Broadly, that's obviously a good thing. But there's a stigma around menstrual products, about period blood, and these are very often advertised as tackling menstrual odour, which is not a thing. This is an advertising construction containing silver or nanosilver. This also doesn't just apply to menstrual products, see also socks, t-shirts and other clothing. That causes both direct toxicity to the human body, but also negative impacts on the vaginal microbiome, known as microbiotoxicity, which can then lead to bacterial infections and even problems with pregnancies. And of course, noble lords have heard me talking much before about the issue of antimicrobial resistance. The silver washes out of these reusable products and down our drains to join the cocktail of other antimicrobial inducing products swirling around in our drains, where there are microbes that are going to be influenced by them and develop resistance. So, my lords, I'm aware that I've said lots of facts and I've perhaps battered the committee with these issues, but these are absolutely crucial issues of human health. They're crucial issues to every consumer in Britain buying any of these products that I've outlined. They're crucial to the people who make these products, whether they're in Leicester or in Dakar. We wear these products some of the time. They are exposed to them every minute of their working day. And of course, they live in communities where the residue of these products is all around people. My lords, these are tabled as probing amendments. I'm aware that the government's intention with this bill is to set an overall picture, but I am really very much hoping to hear from the noble Lord the Minister government's intention to take action in all of these areas and particularly quickly to take action in the area of period products. I put these down as probing, but I need to hear some very positive news about action, otherwise I may well return to these a committee. I beg to move.